Just so you guys know, I actually met Chris for the first time face-to-face. About 10 years ago in Shanghai. One of his top students, Daniel Smith, also trained under John Grinder, Richard Bandler. He was in China, running the China Society of NLP. And Daniel was quite good and always curious where people get their excellence from. You know, where people learn their magic. And this Daniel Smith fellow ran practitioners and mass practitioners in Shanghai and ran a NLP trainers training and flew Chris up from Sydney. So Chris Collingwood here actually trained Daniel and trained a lot of the greats and has trained with a lot of the greats. And I'm passionate about Chris's experience. We won't get too into the stories, but he has up close, intimate stories with Bandler, John Grinder, and all of them. And in fact, he brings John Grinder over to Australia. His program has the blessing from John Grinder, and I've heard John Grinder mention Chris's training a few times. So he runs the graduate certificate, Australia's only, perhaps the world's only postgraduate qualification in neuro-linguistic programming. Him and his wife have a phenomenal reputation in Sydney, Australia, along with some places of Europe. So he's going to be leading today's session. We're looking at the strategies of genius.
I've got a slide presentation, but before we open up the presentation, I thought I'd start with a story. From childhood, I've been interested in people who are exceptional at what they do, and people who are geniuses. And typically the people that we label as geniuses are people who have made a mark in society, whether currently or historically, and we go, oh, that person's a genius. But there are many people of genius who haven't made a mark. A major mark, but they're out there. There are plenty of geniuses around. And so I've always been interested in the differences between people who are exceptional at what they do and most of us. What are those differences? I don't know if anybody here, you don't have to answer this, it's more of a rhetorical question, but anybody here who is very good academically? Fantastic. Now please, so it's Darko, great. Please correct me, okay? Please correct me on this about what I'm about to say if you think otherwise. I'm pretty well convinced that to perform well academically, there are certain patterns that if you have those patterns on board, these behavioral patterns, then you can perform academically. And if you take somebody who's an average performer and you train them up on those particular patterns that work for academia, they're going to improve their performance. As simple as that. And I think it's a shame that in our education system that we don't focus on actually teaching children the patterns to perform well systematically and explicitly. I think if a child's lucky, they may just happen to have particular teachers who have those patterns, and these children may well model their teachers. But there are a lot of children who have not been exposed to those patterns, and as a result are average performers when they could be exceptional performers. And the same goes with patterns of genius. There are a set number of patterns that geniuses have. They're going to have not necessarily all the patterns we're described tonight, but they're going to have some of those particular patterns. But I think my first exposure to geniuses was listening to classical music when I was growing up. So my father was into classical music, and I listened to some of the great composers, and my God, I was in awe that somebody could produce an artwork like that. That's something phenomenal. And so that was one of the first things that really got my attention in childhood. More recently, I was asked to do a series of interviews of people in IT, in the IT world, for a former student who was setting up a startup. And some of these people were, the people you identified that had me interview were good models for his marketing personas. These are the people he wanted to market to. And one gentleman in particular that I interviewed was a phenomenal software engineer. And so I asked him about what it was like writing software. And he told me that, and I saw his state change when he spoke to me. He said, it's like creating something out of nothing with just a few lines of code. And he had one hell of a state for writing software. And he was exceptional at doing that. Unfortunately, the company decided, because he is the best performing software engineer, to make him a manager, which was not a good fit for him. He is a genius at writing software. Had no idea how to manage people, poor guy. But anyway, we helped him bridge some of his well, we helped him bridge to management by simply describing the communication patterns for management as being human algorithms. That was something he could relate to. But anyway, he was a genius at writing software. Later on, after I was very fortunate to come across NLP just before my 21st birthday. And I read this article in a magazine called People Who Read People. So the magazine was Psychology Today magazine. The chief editor was a man called Daniel Goleman. This was before he became famous for writing a book called Emotional Intelligence. And he had written this incredible article about Richard Bandler and John Grinder, these two crazy characters at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and this new thing they developed called neuro-linguistic programming. And the article is called People Who Read People. And I read this article, and by the end of the article, I went, this is for me. Because they were talking about how they were modeling some of the top performing people in the world of therapy and extracting the key patterns that they used to be exceptional at doing psychotherapy. And so that got my attention, due to my interest in people of genius. Later on, John Grinder introduced me to the work of Gregory Bateson. Anybody heard of Gregory Bateson? Fantastic. Oh, fantastic. Oh, that is superb. The anthropologist. Now, the thing about Bateson, he didn't just make contributions to anthropology. He made contributions to what's known as the deep ecology movement. He's really the grandfather of modern systems, family therapy systems work. So modern family therapy has been very much influenced by Bateson. He also made contributions to psychiatry. And what was fascinating about Bateson is he was an anthropologist by trade. However, he grew up in a family of natural historians. So I don't know if anybody's seen some of these films set in Victorian times and have got characters running around with butterfly nets, collecting species. They're natural historians. Now that's been folded. It's now just biology. Bateson's father coined the word genetics, by the way. So William Bateson, Gregory Bateson's father, coined the word genetics. And so he grew up in this family who had been natural historians for, I believe, 3 or so generations. So the family culture, the culture was the culture of people who explored the natural world to find patterns in nature. And then he, rather than going into the family business, he did a terrible thing. He got involved. He became an anthropologist and ran off with a woman called, a very famous woman called Margaret Mead, married her, and had a career in anthropology. However, in the 1950s, he was involved with some of the first conferences on cybernetics. They were called the Macy conferences. And he recognized that some of the patterns they were describing in cybernetics were a good fit. They're the same patterns that he had discovered in his work as an anthropologist. And so what he had done, he took the patterns of thinking from his own family culture of a natural historian, applied it to anthropology, made some discoveries. Then he got involved with cybernetics and recognized patterns of cybernetics that he could then bring back into not just the world of anthropology, but he became very interested in the study of the mind. If you want to read a very good primer on Bateson, by Bateson on his work, Mind and Nature, a Necessary Unity. So Mind and Nature, a Necessary Unity by Gregory Bateson. I'll organize with Adrian to send an email with any references, any books I mentioned tonight. But what I love about Bateson, he took patterns from one discipline and then he took them into a different discipline. And then as a result of that transfer of patterns from one place to another, made new discoveries and made major contributions, actually. And that is one of the interesting patterns, or should we say strategies of genius. The ability to take patterns from one context, applied in a different context. In fact, I say that was probably one of the, not the only one, but one of the fundamental patterns of innovation. Tesla's a pretty interesting character. I've got a quote from Tesla in the slides. We'll talk about Tesla a little later on. Developed AC generators. In fact, the very first electric grid was developed by Tesla, hydropower actually from where was it? Niagara Falls. So that was a Tesla contribution, one of many. Anybody else? Isaac Newton, yeah. Milton Erickson, absolutely. I think Erickson was probably the greatest psychotherapist of the 20th century. Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the concerns John Grinder has about NLP, that people don't generalize across context with the NLP patterns. So somebody might learn NLP in a coaching context and they can only coach with it.
Hey, make sure you listen to that one, guys. That's a really, really key point, because a lot of people learn anchoring and they think, okay, anchoring is a coaching thing, but anchoring you can do anywhere. Strategies and what we do in NLP can be applied to coaching, but it can be applied to any area of life. Don't limit ourselves to coaching. Every now and then I hear a student who says, I can't practice at work. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Of course, you can communicate at work. So being able to copy one area of excellence, put it in other areas of life, and don't limit our NLP to coaching, because that's just one of a million things we can do with it.
Yeah. I will make a negative comment about the way NLP is typically presented nowadays. Now, this is not Adrian, this is some other people, just for the record, is taught in a chunked down way. So rather than teaching a pattern or even a format, or another name for format, technique, people were teaching scripted versions of techniques for one specific context. And so people are not following on what's the actual pattern. The function of a format or a technique is a teaching aid. That's all it is. It's a teaching aid to expose people to the patterns. And what a good trainer does, he or she will sequence a series of related patterns that have different expressions, maybe as techniques, so that the patterns are highlighted to the students' unconscious minds, and then they're more likely to learn the patterns. So if you're learning, the idea is to learn NLP from first principles, then you could apply it anywhere. You want to be able to apply the patterns, sure, if you're coaching somebody, but also if you're consulting, or if you're a parent and have children in terms of how you're parenting, or apply it to your sport or your leisure activities, or to enhancing your relationship with your partner if you're fortunate to have a partner, etc. You want to be able to apply it everywhere. And nobody mentioned Musk, by the way, in terms of the patterns of genius. Well, I must say, I don't agree with some of the things that Musk says. I think his people skills leave a lot to be desired. However, he demonstrates one of the patterns of genius. He talks about as thinking in first principles. But if you really look into what he's doing, he's chunking up what an NLP term. He's able to chunk up to the patterns, is what he does. And that really, that's one of his superpowers. He has another superpower as well. He has an incredible ability for visualization. Has anybody read any of his? Anybody read one or the other of his biographies? Yeah, Adrian has. Okay. So what happens is when solving, sometimes as a problem comes up, it might be in a meeting, and then other people describe it as he disappears. He becomes very still. He looks off into the distance. His breathing becomes shallow, and he might disappear for 20 minutes. Now, anybody who's been exposed to hypnosis would go, oh yeah, trance. He's going into a trance. This is actually what's going on. But it's a visual trance where he visualizes in great detail the various patterns that he then uses to solve the problem. So he has remarkable visualization skills. So that and the ability to chunk up. So I've got a little quote from John Grinder here. So we want to be able to apply patterns of genius. So one place to apply it is problem solving. And one of my favorite quotes from John Grinder: the problem is not the problem. The problem is the state that you use to approach that context. And here's a little thought experiment for you. Now, you may not have time to do it tonight, but note this and play with this in your own time. Reflect upon when you've been very good at solving a problem, and contrast it with an example where you've had difficulty solving a problem. And the thing to consider is, well, I'll say right now, your state will be different. And not just for problem solving, but if you think about performance. So there'll be an area where you work, and there'll be times when you're performing exceptionally well, and there'll be times when you're performing poorly or just average performance. And if you compare examples from a high performance example and an average performance, there will be a difference in your state. So it's a favorite quote, and hint later on we'll talk about. There's a number of you can take a number of these patterns of genius and build a state of genius. Now, we don't really talk about this too openly in Australia because I like to cut the tall poppies down here in Australia. If we can't really say, we can't, you know, if somebody say, what? You think you're a fucking genius, do you? You know, that's Australia. But you can certainly apply it. You don't have to tell anybody you're doing it. Just use a circle of excellence and you can stack some of these patterns into your circle of excellence and have access to a state of genius. So what are some of the patterns that Grinder and Delosier, Judith Delosier, Grinder's ex-wife, they worked together for quite a long time. And what they found were some common patterns. Now, not a genius doesn't necessarily have to have all of these patterns, but they'll have some of these patterns. So the ability to richly represent outcomes. So the ability to, so that if we chunk that up, to be able to do that, you've got to be able to represent in representational systems, you know, detailed, rich representational systems. You know, representations, sorry. You know, rich, elaborated representations. I worked with a genius. He wasn't widely known as a genius, but he certainly was. I call him the Milton Erickson of Australia. He was a psychiatrist. And to give you some idea of the sort of things he used to do, he knocked over a law degree in 3 years while running a psychiatric unit and going through the old divorce courts with his wife of the time. He decided to represent himself, and he thought, well, if I'm going to represent myself, I might as well do a law degree. And this is back in, well, back when divorce in Australia was an adversarial contest. You know, somebody had to be in the wrong. And so he knocked over a law degree in 3 years. In terms of psychotherapy, I met him after he had already come across NLP. We were both NLP trained at the time, and we decided to work together teaching NLP. And what he loved about NLP, it gave him a way of explicitly describing some of the patterns he had developed and was doing intuitively. So he had something like a 15, 20-year career before NLP was developed. So a lot older than I am. He's since passed away, but a brilliant man. Absolutely brilliant. And but he was then able to use NLP to model out and make explicit some of the things he was doing intuitively. But anyway, he told me that he told me about how he nearly got thrown out of medical school. So he's studying medicine, and the lecturer said to him, one of the lecturers basically said, pull your finger out, get your act together. You're going to have to get better marks, or we're throwing you out of medicine. So he made a decision that it would be a good idea to be interested in medicine. So he was only doing medicine because that was a prerequisite to be able to become a psychiatrist, which is a specialty. So you have to have a medical degree first before you can train to be a psychiatrist. So he thought, well, I might as well be interested. So he chose to be interested in medicine. And then he reframed medicine as history because he had a passion for history. So he reframed medicine as history, and his reframe was as follows: this medicine is what they used to believe now. So this is what they used to believe now. It's now history. He's really interested in history. Bang. And of course, then he started performing incredibly well. And so I said, well, what happens when you're learning and you're really interested in something? And he said, I have a vast space that opens up in front of me where I can visualize anything. and everything is learning, he then visualizes it and puts it into this vast space and then finds connections between different ideas. So he had a phenomenal ability to, in terms of rich visual representation. And as you'll see in a few minutes, that's something that Elon Musk did, and also something that Tesla, the man, did as well. So the ability to richly represent outcomes is the pattern that Grinder and Deleuze recognized. The ability to use multiple perceptual positions. Has everybody been exposed to perceptual positions? Very useful. So that is a triple description of the world. One of the things that Bateson has an entire chapter in his book, Mind and Nature and Necessary Unity, where he talks about multiple description, the benefit of having multiple descriptions, even descriptions that may at times seem contradictory. And that's okay too. If they seem contradictory, that's okay. The idea is if you can hold, if it's two different descriptions, if you can hold them both, is useful. So the ability to use multiple perceptual positions, Grinder refers to the perceptual positions model as triple description. So first position, second position, and third position are different, what we refer to as logical types. They're different types of descriptions, and it's through that triple description you get richer information. For if you're exploring a relationship, you get much richer information. One of my favorite quotes is part of a poem by William Blake, written in the 1700s. William Blake, well, a mystical artist, I suppose, is the best way of describing him. And but my favorite quote is, "May God us keep from single vision and Newton's sleep." Putting it into modern English, you know, because God help us make sure that we, don't have a single description of the world, especially a Newtonian one. Now, it's nothing wrong with Newton. I love Newton's work, but at the time, Newton came to fame, and Blake recognized it might become a single description of the world. All very nice, but I think Blake would want people to also still be able to have an artistic description of the world, an aesthetic description of the world, not just a mechanistic description. But the point is, multiple descriptions support innovation, and also you have a richer experience of life if you can perceive the world in more than one way, and if you can represent the world in multiple ways as well. So the ability to richly represent outcomes, the ability to use multiple perceptual positions, that's going to give you a triple description at least as well. The ability to construct visual images. So now, it doesn't have to be just visual images. If you were a composer, auditory construction as well. The ability to use the as-if frame, which we'll come to in a few minutes. And here's an interesting one: a sensitivity to communication from the unconscious mind. If you read some biographies of some famous scientists, a quite common pattern is they have an intuitive insight that leads to a discovery. I think it was Watson and Crick, the people that came up with the idea of the double helix. The DNA had a double helix shape. Was sitting in a pub in the UK having a beer. I think it's Cambridge. My wife, yes, Cambridge. My wife has been to that pub, has had a beer there. She told me she's had a beer at that pub. I suppose you could call that a pilgrimage of sorts to Watson and Crick, and one of them was seeing the way the bubbles were going up the glass in the beer in a helix. And I understand that led to the aha moment. Double helix. So unconscious minds, being sensitive to communication from your unconscious. By the way, are you aware of your own intuitive signals? Do you have a sense of that when your unconscious mind draws your attention to something? That's one way you have a signal. People aware of signals. Very important. Frankly, that's how I found it. That's how I got involved with NLP. I read this article in that magazine, and at the end of the article, I knew it was for me. I had a signal from my unconscious mind. Now, I didn't know anything about signals. I had no conscious understanding about how the unconscious communicated, but I had a communication from my unconscious mind. It felt right for me. And I went, okay, I want to do this. So that's my unconscious. I tell you, it saved my bacon many times, having signals from my unconscious. It's given me warnings. Anybody ever had a warning? You just go, ooh, something not quite right. Yeah, you want to have both. You want to have a signal that goes, yes, this is for me. And you also want to have one that says, this is not appropriate or not right for me. So we want to pay attention to our signals. And a couple of more important ones, the ability to chunk up, chunk down, and chunk sideways. Has anybody done any chunking work with Adrian? Okay. I'll use some jargon, and if you haven't come across the jargon, Adrian later, can fill you in on it later on. But the ability to do a logical inclusion set is a formal way of doing chunking, really useful. So I'll give an example further in. And the last one is the ability to enter into an attention external high performance state. A common name for that, a flow state. Okay, anybody experienced a flow state? Fabulous. Well, may you have more. They tend to be rather pleasurable states. And just as a marker, just note next time you're in your flow state, typically your attention is using both foveal, that's focus vision, and open peripheral vision. People tend to be centered in their physiology, so centered in their bodies, minimal muscular tension, and there is a complete absence of self-reflection. That is no internal dialogue. These are some of the features of flow states. By the way, would you like to be able to activate, generate flow states on demand? Yeah, well, you can.
Yes.
It is very possible, and something that we do on a regular basis, and in terms of assisting students and clients to activate flow states. And by the way, it's not just one state. It's a set of states that have the same features, but it's a set of states. Anybody done any Tony Robbins? Good. Okay. Now, number of people I've spoken to have done Tony Robbins. They have an idea that flow state, a high performance state is just one state, where it's like, you might ever do this thing where you're standing up and you go, that thing? Yeah. Well, that's one flow state. One high performance state. No, not necessarily a flow state, but it's a high performance state. But there are other high performance states. So, you want to have a high performance state, sleeping state, where you have a really good, solid, deep, rejuvenating sleep at night. It's a good idea. That type of high performance state is not the type of high performance state you want to have when you're out having dinner with your partner. Um, um, there was a study done that now how these psychologists come up with some of these studies is just mind-boggling to me. There was a study done that they discovered that uh, that playing Wagner while driving put people into a dangerous state while driving a car. So, because the music was so rousing. um, but anyway, there's a whole set of high performance states, a whole set. You want different types of high performance states for different contexts. And better still, how about a high performance state which has all the features of a flow state? Sense of timelessness, attention external, a complete lack of self-consciousness, where you're simply in the moment, performing exceedingly well, doing your thing, whatever your thing happens to be. Yeah, that's the type of state to have. We have games for building content-free high-performance states. And that's a whole, that would be an entire topic. But I recommend talking to Adrian about that. He knows how to build those states.
And just one other thing, Chris, if you could go back. Yep, just one other thing, guys. This is common patterns of genius, but if you also look at it, it's also partly the reverse. How many times do you have someone or yourself is stuck? And when you're stuck or your client is stuck, they're generally not able to represent the outcome, or they're stuck in first position, or they're not able to visualize the outcome, or they're not using the as if. So as much as these are the patterns of genius, it's also the patterns where people go wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, the inverse, where a person they're in a state where they don't have access to these patterns. Absolutely, that's a very good point. Now, there's a description from one of his biographies, Musk. It seems as though the part of the brain that's usually reserved for visual processing, the part that is used to process images coming in from my eyes, get taken over by internal thought processes. He has very rich visual representations. So that's one of his superpowers. Okay. By the way, and if you think of a good quality NLP curriculum, for example, Prac and Master Prac with Adrian, where in the curriculum does Adrian, a good training cover something that's fabulous for developing richer visual representation? There's a topic area where you
future pacing.
Future pacing, yep, I accept that. And so that's an application. Okay, that's an application of visualization. Is there anything that focuses on developing the representations?
Working on submodalities.
Yeah, submodalities. And not just visual. You can develop your auditory representations, and you can make finer distinctions in your kinesthetic submodalities. So when I first met John Grinder, I was already a master practitioner. I was a young guy. I was 25 and I was a master practitioner. And being a 25-year-old, I thought I was pretty damn good. I was very mistaken, but I thought I was pretty damn good. But, 25-year-old guy. And I met John Grinder. So John came to Australia for the first time, and I thought, well, myself and my mate, my friend, my buddy, we would prefer to have seen Richard Bandler, okay, because Bandler was fun. However, John Grinder was coming. He's the other co-developer. So, well, it's better than nothing. We want to go see John Grinder. And at the end of the second day, I was completely blown away. So I was trying to track the different patterns he's using. So I was trying to pick up on all the different ways he was marking stuff out using tonal shifts. But then there's all the analog stuff. He was marking stuff out with his body. I was trying to track the embedded commands and the embedded questions and all that stuff. And of course, completely overwhelmed my limited 7 plus or minus 2 chunks of attention. But anyway, he did a 2-day introduction to NLP. Then we went into a 12-day program on family and marriage counseling. Great program, but I do admit, couple counseling is not my thing. So I do not specialize in couple counseling. In fact, I avoid it. I don't like couple counseling. personal taste, It's like, oh, I don't want to see couples fighting and have to deal with that stuff and breaking patterns of anchors and stuff with couples. I'd rather work with people one-on-one than with couples. But anyway, I did this program on family and marriage counseling because that's what was available. So I did it. And we did some work with metaphor. And by the way, do people know what an isomorphic metaphor is? So it's a one-to-one matching. So you have let's say you're working with a couple, a family, but the real problem's between the parents. So the pattern is the son gets bad marks at school, and then father loses it and is verbally abusive to mother. Very bad pattern. Okay, there's an example. So if we were to make an isomorphic metaphor out of that, we go, okay, well, there's the pattern. Where's the context? So there's the family. Let's put this into a different context for the story. Okay, it could be a sailing ship. It could be it could be a decent sized yacht, actually. Okay, let's make it a yacht. So the family lives on a yacht. Now, let's change the character. So father becomes the captain. So it's a traditional 1950s marriage. Father's in charge, that type of thing. Pretty horrible, but anyway. And so we're going to make father the captain. We're going to make mother sound awful, but the first mate. So she's the first mate. And we're going to make the son the cabin boy. Now we've got a one-to-one matching of the people involved with the pattern, the family, 2 characters on a yacht. And then all we do is we repeat the pattern, but now it's now a story. So the pattern remains, but the content of the content that carries the pattern is different as a story. So remember the pattern. Sonny gets a bad mark at school on his report card, and then father loses it verbally with mother. So we're going to match the presenting patterns in the story. So we might start the story by talking about this yacht and about how the captain swore at the first mate after the cabin boy set the wrong sails. So all the key pieces is a one-to-one matching. And the pattern, the family pattern remains, but characters, the people become characters in the story, and the same pattern in the family gets represented in the story. We call it an isomorphic metaphor. and John had made a blanket statement. Anybody who wants a stretch, come and see him. And I thought, well, I want a refinement, not so much a stretch. I want to improve my ability to generate isomorphic metaphors. So I went up to John Grin and I said, look, I really want to improve my ability to create isomorphic metaphors. So he said to me, well, this is a strategy that I use. He has a split screen. So you hold the person you want to create a character for, an image of the person on one screen, and then you pop up different things on the other screen until you get a match. So it could be trees, it could be rocks, it could be cartoon characters, whatever. And you keep flicking them up until you get something that matches. And that's how you find a character. He uses a split screen. a little bit more to it. You get a match and it feels right. So you're engaging your intuition, your unconscious as well. And until you mentioned that, I had never thought about things using a split screen. Now, visual submodality, split screen is it single or multiple screens as a visual submodality distinction. So one of the things I think is very useful when playing with any submodalities, visual, auditory, or kinesthetic, go through them and go, do I use these? Do I use this particular submodality distinction? If not, what happens if I add it in? Where's a context where I can use it? So if you don't use a split screen, put a split screen in, test out, find a context where it's useful. If you don't think in transparencies, there is context where thinking in transparencies is useful. What happens, if you might code certain memories with a particular color hue, like a color filter in the theater. So by going through, you can start building in and increasing the range of submodalities you're using, let's say, with visual representation, so that you've got richer visual representations. Anybody got a... Sorry, yes.
Yeah, I just want to throw in my daughter now. When my daughter spells, she sees the word up here, and she doesn't see the word small. She sees it in big letters. It's called the spelling strategy. But whenever she wants to learn a new word, she just visualizes it up here. And Chris, I remember you teaching us the responding to criticism.
Yeah.
And with responding to criticism, we see the person and we imagine the words. This is a skill that we can all develop to enhance our operating system.
Yeah. So one of the things I do with kids with spelling, I make sure that they represent the background for the word in a different, strongly contrasted color so that the word sticks out. Now, with one of my brothers, when I taught him to spell, he was spelling appallingly at school, and I spent a Sunday afternoon with him. We went through his entire spelling book for the year, and we coded it in all the words. And one of the things that worked for him was having a texture to the letters. So visually, but he also gave it a texture. So he had very good kinesthetics, so we gave it a texture. In fact, we made it's like it was embossed, so he could run his hand over the letters as well. Still represented up there in the visual space, but he could run his hand over and feel the letters. And that worked very well. Your comment, Adrian, your daughter, she represents the letters for the word large enough for her. So we're really talking about adjusting things with submodalities. Now, the important thing is, anybody got a photographic memory? Would you like to have one? If you don't, you can. You've got to put a bit of work in, but a bit of submodality work would assist you in developing a photographic memory. So Musk has this incredible ability to visualize rich internal visual representations. But guess what? So did Tesla, Nikola Tesla. I won't read that out. I'll just tell the story. He once did an experiment where he designed a motor. He then blueprinted it and had the engineers make the motor. And then what he did is they turned the motor on and left it to run for so many weeks. The mental construction of the motor he ran in his head. At the end of X number of weeks, he took the mental construct apart and looked for the areas of wear and tear, documented it, had it all sealed up, and then had somebody else stick it in a safe. And then that's right, he did that, ran it mentally first, and then they built the engine and ran the engine. After the engine, the actual physical engine had run for same amount of weeks, the engineers took it apart, and then they documented the areas of wear and tear. And then they opened up the safe, pulled out the description that had been sealed, and it was a 1-to-1 match. Now, his ability to visualize, in psychology, so I've got a psych degree as well, it's referred to as eidetic memory, memory recall, but of high quality, accurate visual memory. And, we're told, oh, yes, some children have this, but but adults don't. That's one of the things I was told. I studied psychology. Well, Tesla had it as an adult. But in childhood, he had this eidetic memory to begin with, and he would play back the visual representations of the day, full blown detail, and they were so vivid, so well represented that it interfered with his ability to get to sleep. So, and it was not something he had conscious control over. So he started constructing images. That's something he could consciously do. And then he was able to construct things, and then from that, construct scenes that helped him to get to sleep at night. And that's how he managed to get over his insomnia as a child. But the byproduct was he ended up with a phenomenal ability to construct detailed visual representations. It's all there in his biography. It's a great story. Sorry, it's a great read. Not this. It's a great read, not necessarily a story, but anyway. But visual representation. So now we can take these patterns and find NLP patterns for doing it. So here they are. Have you covered a well-formed outcome with Adrian? Probably, yeah. Now, I don't know if he's taught you this, but did you cover outcome, intention, and consequences? Fantastic. Well, those are two formats, NLP formats. And by the way, they contain patterns for outcomes. So what if you were, do people know what a circle of excellence is? Anybody cover circle of excellence?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody hasn't, then Adrian, no. So it's probably something for the future if you haven't covered it yet. So what you do is you take these patterns one at a time, review them, reactivate them, experience them, and then take them into a circle of excellence. You build a circle of excellence and you populate that circle of excellence with these patterns. And by putting all these patterns into a circle of excellence, you're going to build, it will result in what we refer to as a genius state. So you can have a state which carries all these patterns. So you go for outcome, intention, consequences, drop that into your circle of excellence, well-formed outcome, drop it in, review perceptual positions, drop it in, do some work with activating your visual construction, ability to do visual construction, drop it in. The as-of frame, review that, drop that in. Logical inclusion sets, which contains chunking up and chunking down and chunking sideways, drop that in. And review your signals with your unconscious mind, add that in, and then finish it off, do a new code game, build a content-free high-performance state and drop that in. And that will that will help integrate the entire state. And then you have a state which is where all these patterns are fully accessible and available, that you can then apply that. This is one of the exercises we do on our training programs. And then what we do once the person has these patterns of genius fully available, we then, just to as a little convincer experience, I have them find an example from their personal history where they had difficulty solving a problem, or it could be from school. They had difficulty learning something, and then take that state and bring that back into the past and find out what happens. So that's typically a very powerful experience. And the other thing I like people to do is find a current outcome or a current problem to solve, and then bring this state into that context. So remember, the problem is not the problem. The problem is the state that you bring to the context. And that can be a useful thing. Any questions so far? Okay, let's have a little. So you've covered outcome, intention, consequences, haven't you, with Adrian? Well-formed outcome. You've done perceptual positions. Do you know how to use your physiology to activate visualization?
That could be a good one for here.
Okay. So, if you observe, now I highly recommend this, and this is something that Adrian would have recommended. Pay attention in the world. Observe people and listen to people. Observe their patterns, and you can also listen to their language patterns. So pay attention in the world. And one of the things you would have seen when people are visualizing, okay, so what are people doing in their physiology when they're visualizing? So Adrian's demonstrating it right now.
Daydreaming.
Okay, daydreaming.
There is eyes movement. Eye
Fantastic,
movement
Jay.
is
Love
a
it.
different state.
So
Physiological state.
first thing to note is Adrian's posture. Okay. And if he was side on to us, so if you could kind of go side on, Adrian. So don't look at the screen, just look out. Yeah. Now note the head position. So where is his eyes and his head? Where's the tilting up, isn't it? Tilting up. Now breathing pattern. Where's his breathing pattern? It's up here. So shallow breathing, head tilt up, eyes either on the horizon or slightly above. And if you were to observe the person, if you could see their eyes and they're visualizing, often you see pupil dilation as well. The pupils get larger. Okay. And I don't know if you can see me. I'll see if I can do this. I'm going to stand up. Okay. So I'm going to present something, and I want you just to note the experience. So, yeah, I was just imagining, in fact, I was recording visually, I was looking back on a list of things I need to do tomorrow, and I was just imagining what that would be like. And you know what? It just didn't feel like the right thing to do. Now, that's one presentation. I was just looking back over a list of things to do tomorrow, and then I visualized, well, yeah, these are the key things. But, I just felt that it wasn't quite the right thing to do. Now, which presentation made more sense, the first or the second? The second, thank God for that. I would have been really concerned if somebody said the first. That's fabulous. So note when I use visual predicates in the second presentation, so if I said something to you, imagine for a moment just imagine some outcome you have and step into it and be aware of how that feels is very different to going, imagine for a moment some outcome that you have and step in and be aware of how it feels. The second presentation in that case is a mismatch. There's a mismatch between the non-verbal communication and the words. Yeah, thank you. And so, so when we visualize, people tend to look up, they breathe shallow, you may see a pupil dilation. And so if you adopt a visual physiology, that's going to support your visualization. So one of the things I do if I'm teaching a child to spell, I have them adopt a visual physiology. And if they were to speak, the voice is going to be up and faster. The breathing will be shallow and more rapid, and the eyes will be on the horizon or slightly above. Same pattern applies if you've ever had a problem taking criticism personally. All you do is you take a visual physiology, and as the person says whatever they say, you take the words and you visually represent the words on a screen. If you do that, you're not going to feel, you break the auditory feeling crossover, or what we call the auditory feeling synesthesia, because you now adopted the visual physiology and you're actually visualizing the words. So auditory external visualization. If you do that, you can't, you're not going to take it personally.
And are you also saying that we could do this as easily as visualizing ourselves having a wonderful day tomorrow?
Sure. So if you're going to visualize yourself having a wonderful day tomorrow, adopt a visual physiology when you do the visualization part of it. So upright, shallow breathing, pick up the pace of your breathing, a little faster and shallow, look up and visualize.
In February 2024, we embarked on a transformative journey in the heart of Bali, where minds were empowered, connections were built, and breakthroughs were achieved.
Hey guys, we're here having the time of our life. The time of our life. It's a combination of learning new stuff and celebrating all the growth and the transformation we've had this year.
As the sun set on our time in Bali, a new adventure awaits us in Chiang Mai, 2025.
Hey, a couple of important things if you want to come down to get the most out of this. I ask everyone to make a shopping list before coming here, a shopping list. New behaviors, new beliefs, perhaps value systems, or maybe a whole new identity. So before everyone comes, they create a bit of a wish list, a bit of a shopping list. And while we're here, we make it happen. Now that pre-course, we actually include a lot of our, like the training that we sell for thousands of dollars, we actually include that in a lot of our training. So when you come along, you're gonna get access to that and go through it and make this trip absolutely dynamite for you.
Join us as we continue our journey of growth and transformation. Together, we thrive. See you in Chiang Mai.